Pokémon preparing to attack them. Instead they saw Jessie and James standing behind them, gaping up at the Goliath Pokémon. Do you really think our stun sauce did this, Jessie? James asked, never taking his eyes off of the Pokémon. Jessie didn't even spare a glance at her teammate, her eyes were locked onto the Pokémon in front of them. Meowth said the effects of that stuff was unknown and he only thought that it would kill the Pokémon. Maybe it could have caused this. But it was a tentacool that the sauce was dumped on. Not a tentacruel. Maybe it evolved after it disappeared. James offered weakly, still looking fearful at being so close to such a monster. Ash went wide-eyed. So you three are the reason for the tentacruel being so big. You spilled some unknown chemical on tentacool and then it evolved into this. He pointed at the Pokémon. What's wrong with you three? Don't you ever think before you do anything? When you told me earlier that you dumped your stun sauce, or whatever you called it, on a tentacool, you never said it was a chemical. Jessie snapped out of her stupor and glared at Ash. I don't need to be scolded like a child by some child, she growled. We didn't know this would happen. James defended. Ash looked dumbfounded. You two are completely unbelievable. How stupid can any two, or I guess three including Meowth, individuals be? Before the fight could progress, Misty stepped in. What are you three doing here anyway? I figured you would be cowering and hiding out in a building somewhere while we and the police cleaned up your mess. She accused. Jessie and James shared embarrassed looks and seemed ashamed. We were worried about Meowth. Jessie mumbled. We couldn't just leave him if he's in danger, so we trailed you twerps in hopes of finding and saving Meowth if he's in trouble. James said, looking embarrassed at revealing something he and Jessie both thought were weaknesses in caring about their teammate. Ash raised an eyebrow. If that really is true and not just some lie, then you shouldn't be ashamed because you care about Meowth and don't want him to be hurt. I don't know why you two look at being caring and kind to others and your Pokémon is such a terrible thing. It doesn't make you weak to care about others. On the contrary, it actually makes you stronger because it gives you something to fight for other than yourselves. Maybe if you accepted that, then you wouldn't be such miserable failures at everything you do in life. He said wisely. Jessie just huffed and turned away. Whatever, twerp. You're just kid, what would you know? Yeah, you don't anything about anything. James agreed, also turning away. Ash just rolled his eyes. Believe what you want to believe, I don't care. You're too stubborn and thick-headed to ever accept anyone's advice anyway. He looked back towards the hotel and gasped. No. He shouted. Misty and the two rockets looked in the direction Ash did. Misty saw what had made Ash so upset right away. The giant tentacruel was almost upon the hotel and the gem on its forehead was starting to glow as it slowly lifted its massive tentacles up. It's going to destroy the hotel. Misty screamed. Without even thinking about it, Ash and Misty took off running towards the building as fast as they could. The only thoughts running through their minds was of Brock and Giselle possibly still being inside. Tentacruel, please stop. Misty screamed. Don't do it. Ash yelled. Pika. Pikachu shouted loudly. But it was already too late and they were too far away. The massive Pokémon brought two huge tentacles up over its head and then swung them down in an arc. The tentacles smashed into the hotel and cut through the top portion of it like a knife through hot butter. Debris and large pieces of the hotel crumbled and fell to the ground below as the tentacruel continued to attack the building mercilessly. Swing after swing it brought its huge tentacles down upon the hotel as the smaller tentacool and tentacruel stood back at a safe distance and fired off psybeams at the building, aiding in its destruction. Ash and Misty watched in horror as the tentacruel made one more sideways swipe with a tentacle and completely cut the hotel in half, starting at the 6th floor all the way up. The entire top half, now free from the bottom part, slowly leaned to one side until the entire massive object fell to the ground below and hit so hard it caused a tremor that nearly knocked Ash, Misty and the rockets off their feet. Ash and Misty stared with tears building in their eyes at the completely destroyed hunk of concrete and metal that was once the entire upper floors. No. Misty whispered as the tears began to fall. Ash slowly crawled forward on his hands and knees and then stopped, kneeling where he was. He stretched his hand out and at the destroyed hotel. Brock. Giselle. He could only think of his squinty-eyed friend and his beautiful girlfriend as he knelt there in complete despair. He didn't think that the Tentacool and Tentacruel would make it to the hotel so fast. He hoped against hope that maybe, just maybe, his friend and girlfriend got out, but he didn't see how. The attack came too early. The giant Tentacruel swung two tentacles down on the remaining bottom half of the hotel and completely destroyed all that was left of it with that one final strike. It then looked down at the grounds surrounding the now annihilated hotel and charged up the gem in the center of its forehead. With one loud, gigantic size-enhanced bellow of TENTACRUEL. It fired a massive psybeam attack at the grounds far below it and upon the attack making contact with its target. Caused a large sonic boom that destroyed everything. The gardens, gates, pool, everything was completely destroyed in seconds. When the smoke cloud cleared, the Watercrown Hotel was no more. As Ash and Misty knelt there on the ground, lost in depression with Pikachu no better off, they suddenly heard someone calling out to them. They snapped their heads up and looked around. Ash. Misty. They heard. They continued to look around and their hearts nearly stopped when they saw Giselle and Brock come running across the war-toned city streets towards them from the opposite direction of the hotel. Ash and Misty went wide-eyed and their mouths gaped upon seeing their friends, who they thought were most likely dead, running towards them. They just stood there as Brock and Giselle finally reached them. They were covered in dirt and rubble just like Ash and Misty were from battling the Tentacool and Tentacruel with their Pokémon. But aside from that they were totally fine. Giselle was even holding Horsey in her arms. Ash and Misty stayed silent as their friends began greeting them. Thank Arceus, you two are alright. Giselle started. Yeah, things in the city are so bad right now that we didn't how you guys were faring with your Pokémon since we knew you were battling the Tentacool and Tentacruel the whole time. Brock said. Misty just stuttered out, how? We thought you two were dead when Tentacruel destroyed the hotel. We had no idea if you made it out or not since it destroyed the hotel faster than we thought it would and we were just. We honestly thought that you two were dead. Misty said as she started letting a few tears fall from her eyes. Giselle smiled softly and wrapped Misty up in a tight hug. We got out safe and sound, Misty, well before the hotel was destroyed. We saw the giant Tentacruel making its way towards the hotel, so we hurried as fast as we could to reach it first. After we told the employees of the hotel what was happening, they were really quick in getting everyone in the hotel and on the grounds evacuated to a safe place. She stopped and just gently soothed Misty, who was now trying to calm herself down. Brock continued for her. We were able to get up to our rooms and get all of our stuff, and Giselle grabbed Horsey before we left with everyone else. I even saw a bunch of hotel employees come running out of the elevator with a bunch of water Pokémon in their arms when we were getting everyone together in the lobby. I guess they must have went up to Nastina's office and got all of the Pokémon out of the aquarium she had in there. After we got everyone out of the hotel, a bunch of officers met us further in the city and then led us all to a panic shelter where they had evacuated everyone else in the city too. Unfortunately, right after the last of the people from the hotel made it into the panic shelter, a bunch of Tentacool and a few Tentacruel appeared and attacked the officers and their Pokémon. Giselle and I helped fight them off with our own, even though all Giselle and I have is both of our Gravelers, my Onix and Zubat, and her Cubone. He was stopped by Giselle coughing into her hand. Brock shook his head. Right, sorry Giselle. Her Cubone actually evolved into Marowak during the battle. Giselle just smiled proudly of her Pokémon. Anyway, we managed to fight them off with the officers' help and then found ourselves pulled into even more battles with the invading Pokémon. Eventually we managed to get free from the battling and decided to come and find you too. He finished. By this point, Misty had calmed down and Giselle released her. She handed Horsey to the other girl with a smile. He really missed you, Misty, she said kindly. Misty gave Giselle a genuine smile and thanked her as she took Horsey into her arms, cradling him close. I'm so glad you're okay, she said to the small Pokémon happily. Horsey smiled up at her. Horsey, she said happily, enjoying being in Misty's arms again. Giselle then looked at Ash, who hadn't said a word and was just staring at them. Ash, are you okay? She asked him, placing her hand on his cheek. I was really worried about you. I hope we didn't scare you too, Bahemph. She was silenced by Ash pulling her close and kissing her so intently that she saw stars in her eyes. He lifted her up off of her feet and held her close as he continued to kiss her intently. She tightened her grip on him and ran her hands through his hair as they continued to show their affection for one another. When they finally separated, he held her close and hugged her tightly. I was so afraid I lost you again. Thank Arceus you're safe. He praised while taking in her sweet-smelling scent. Giselle smiled at him warmly and kissed him chastely on the lips again. I'm totally safe and sound, Ash. He hugged her close again and then walked over to Brock after he released her. Brock, thank you so much for keeping Giselle safe. I'm really glad you're alright too. Brock nodded and smiled. It's no problem, Ash, I'm just glad you and Misty are also safe. You had us worried there for a while when we couldn't find you. Ash laughed sheepishly and rubbed the back of his head. Yeah, it was all pretty confusing. He looked over at the now destroyed hotel. Well, Nastina won't be happy. He observed. I can't believe Tentacruel so easily destroyed the entire hotel. That's insane. Giselle exclaimed. They all nodded their heads in agreement. Suddenly James shouted. It's moving again. They all turned their heads and saw the giant Tentacruel on the move. This time heading deeper into the heart of the city. We have to stop it somehow. Ash looked up at the gigantic creature. Come on guys, we need to follow it. He said as he took off running. Right. His friends said as they took off after him. Jesse and James stared after them in shock. Follow that thing, Jesse said fearfully. But if we don't follow them, James started. We'll be left alone here if any more of those Tentacruel come back this way to attack. They both shared a look. Follow the twerps. They agreed at the same time as they took off after them. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Ash and his friends followed behind the giant Tentacruel through the city as it went deeper into its heart. They eventually saw that a police blockade was set up at an intersection some distance ahead, with every cop in Hutberport standing there in wait with their Pokémon around them, prepared to stop the attacking sea Pokémon from reaching the evacuation shelters at all cost. Officer Jenny was standing at the very front of the blockade with a megaphone in her hand. She spoke into it as the Pokémon came closer. Halt. Don't come any closer. If any of you try to break through this blockade, then we will not hesitate to have our Pokémon use deadly force. She threatened. She and all of her men looked extremely intimidated by not just the army of Tentacruel and Tentacruel coming closer to them, but also the massive Tentacruel that was leading the others. The giant Tentacruel came to a stop and the rest of the Pokémon halted behind it. A great standoff commenced between people and Pokémon, with neither side moving a muscle. Suddenly, the giant Tentacruel lifted one of its huge tentacles, making every one of the officers flinch and prepare for some kind of attack. However, they were shocked when, instead of attacking, the Tentacruel produced a small Pokémon from within the forest of tentacles it possessed and displayed it to the viewing crowd of humans in front of it. Ash, his friends and Jesse and James all gasped upon seeing just who the Pokémon was. Meowth. They all shouted at once. What is Meowth doing with Tentacruel? Giselle asked aloud. The Pokémon had its tentacle wrapped firmly around Meowth and was covering his mouth with it. The smaller Pokémon was completely wide-eyed with fear. Suddenly, the gem on Tentacruel's head started glowing and a bright blue light ran through its tentacle and into Meowth. The talking Pokémon stopped struggling instantly and his eyes turned a blue color. Tentacruel's eyes were also glowing blue as well. Meowth opened his mouth then and spoke in a projected voice that carried out across the city. His voice still sounded the same, only more robotic now. Take a good look around your city, humans. Meowth began. Do you see the destruction and the chaos that has been caused this day? Do you know why we attacked your city? He demanded. Ash and his friends were completely confused, and the police were even more so confused than they were. For one, they were being spoken to by a Pokémon, and what's more, it sounded like it was coming more from the giant Tentacruel, and Meowth was merely being the medium. Jessie looked furious. Meowth, that little traitor. He's working with the enemy. She accused. I don't think that's the case, guys. Ash began. They all looked at him. What do you mean, twerp? James asked. Ash looked at Meowth, who was not only speaking strangely but whose eyes were also glowing the same color as Tentacruel's. He started explaining uncertainly. I think that Tentacruel is somehow using some form of telepathy, possibly from the gem on its forehead that allows it to use psychic-type attacks like Psybeam, and is using Meowth to speak to us all. I know it doesn't make much sense, but it definitely looks that way. I think Tentacruel must have found the fact that Meowth can talk to be very helpful to its cause, and so it took him after it got rid of Jessie and James earlier. They all just looked back up and listened closely as Tentacruel started speaking through Meowth again. We are attacking your city and destroying your homes the same way you have done to ours. Meowth said angrily. Officer Jenny spoke into the megaphone again. What are you talking about? No one in this city has ever attacked or destroyed any of your homes before. We have left you and your fellow Pokémon alone and not once ever have attacked you. What you have done here today with your fellow Tentacool and Tentacruel was completely unprovoked. She fired back. Lies. The possessed voice of Meowth yelled, causing everyone to recoil in fear. We made our homes in the coral reefs outside of this city along with many other fellow water Pokémon. We have resided in those reefs for generations and have always lived peaceful lives. That was until you humans began building your dwellings over top of our homes and destroying what has been so precious and dear to us for so long. You crushed, flattened and annihilated much of the reefs live in. Because of your selfish ways and not caring who or what you harm in your quest for progress, our lives have been all but ruined, and now only a fraction of the reefs remain for us to live in now. Officer Jenny and the other officers shared bewildered and confused looks. But that can't be right. Jenny argued. There are strict laws and regulations in place by the city that bans anyone from ever building over land that Pokémon have made their natural habitat and call their homes. There must be some mistake because we have never done such a thing before and never would. This city respects the Pokémon that live in the sea as our neighbors and would never do something as terrible as destroy your homes. The possessed Meowth narrowed his eyes. Then obviously some of you must have ignored your so-called laws, because our homes being destroyed is not a mistake. We saw it happen with our own eyes and tried for so long to stop you humans from building your homes over top of our reefs. We tried being peaceful and getting you to stop without aggression, but you would not heed our warnings. For that you shall all pay for the crimes you have committed against us. Ash got a feeling that the fighting was not going to be resolved peacefully no matter what was said. No one knew it was really Nastina who was entirely responsible for the destruction of the water Pokémon's coral reef home, and he had a feeling that things were not going to remain stable enough on the Pokémon's side to give time for Ash and his friends to even have a hope of explaining the truth. He had a bad feeling that this would only be ended if the Tentacool were defeated and then had no choice but to listen to an explanation. In order to beat them though, that required bringing down their leader, the giant Tentacruel, which was right now impossible for everyone in the city but Ash. No one else had any Pokémon that even came close to matching the pure size and power of such a behemoth. Except one. Ash did have one Pokémon that he felt confident could defeat it. He quickly pulled out his Pokédex and put his plan into action. He had one spot available on his team, but he needed two, so he temporarily sent Pidgeotto back to the lab. He waited a while and then a few moments later, the two Pokeballs he wanted appeared on the transporter pad, one after the other. He silently thanked Professor Oak for being so on top of his game. Ash quickly pocketed the Pokédex and then attached the Pokeballs to his belt just as he heard Giselle say, "Where did Misty go?" They all looked around and saw that Misty had disappeared. "I have no idea," Brock answered. "Misty." He called out for her. Jessie suddenly pointed ahead of them at a nearby building. "Isn't that the orange-haired twerpet up there?" she said. They looked to where she was pointing and saw Misty climbing up on top of the roof of a tall building with Horsey still in her arms. "What's she doing up there?" Giselle said, baffled. Ash knew what she was doing and he just prayed to Arceus that she would be safe. Misty made it onto the roof and ran over to the edge. From the height she was at, she was hoping that Tentacruel would hear her. Tentacruel. She yelled up to it. The Pokémon looked around after hearing something and looked down to see Misty looking up at it from a nearby rooftop. It swung Meowth down closer to the girl and turned its massive body to face her. What do you want, little human? It had Meowth ask angrily. Misty stared up at the giant Pokémon with sorrow, pity and understanding shining in her eyes. Her heart was breaking at what had happened to cause these usually so gentle and peaceful water Pokémon to become so angry and hostile. She also felt a whole new level of hatred for Nastina boil up from under the surface but pushed it back down to concentrate on the task at hand. Tentacruel, please stop your attacks on this city. I can vouch for everything that Officer Jenny is saying. No one in this city had any idea of what was being done to your homes in the coral reefs. Everyone thought that no Pokémon lived out there because none were ever seen. I know that sounds like a lie, but it's not, I promise. I know who is really responsible for destroying your homes, and it's not a group of people or the whole city. It's just one person. One horrible and evil person who only cares about making money no matter who she hurts in the process. Tentacruel by this point was interested. It was inclined to listen to this human because it detected nothing but sincerity and honest intentions coming from her. Also, at the prospect of finding out who destroyed its home, it was now more willing to listen than earlier. Who was it? The possessed Meowth demanded. Misty understood even more now. The Tentacruel and Tentacool really didn't have any clue that it was Nastina after all. They had just destroyed her hotel because it was in their path and were so angry they didn't care what they destroyed. She took a deep breath and then responded to Tentacruel. Her name is Nastina and she is the one who was building those condos over your homes. She is also the owner of the hotel that you destroyed earlier. She blackmailed and threatened members of the city council to allow her to build whatever she wanted whenever she wanted, or otherwise she was going to kill them and their families. She's a horrible and wicked person who should be the one taking your well-deserved wrath, not the innocent people of this city. Please, Tentacruel. A few tears escaped her eyes. I love water Pokémon with all of my heart, and to see you doing things like this that is so out of your nature breaks my heart. Please, Tentacruel, just stop. Please. Water Pokémon are so peaceful, elegant and beautiful. Don't do anything more to taint that image. She begged. Horsey. Horsey called up to Tentacruel from Misty's arms. Horsey. Horsey. He continued to say. Misty looked down at Horsey, and even though she couldn't understand what he was saying, she knew he was trying to plead the human's case and defend not just her but all of them. When Horsey finished, Meowth just scowled. It still doesn't matter that only one human was supposedly involved with the destruction of our home. If what the female says is true, then the lead humans of this city could have denied this. Nastina, rather, she threatened they and their families are not. They chose their own preservation over ours, and now we are merely doing the same thing and protecting what little bit of our home remains. If you were a loyal reef Pokémon and cared for our home, then you would stand with us, not against us. Horsey. The small Pokémon said indignantly. The possessed Meowth grew a very angry look on his face. You say that we are in the wrong for taking rightful vengeance on those that have wronged us. That we should merely forgive and forget. How dare you call yourself a reef Pokémon with allegiances such as yours? You're a disgrace. Tentacruel brought a tentacle up in the air and hovered it over Misty and Horsey. You will pay for your insolence and traitorous ways. Everyone saw what was about to happen. Officer Jenny shouted out through the megaphone, "No. Don't do it, please." Misty, Giselle and Brock panicked all at once. Ash immediately took action. He jumped up and ran out into the street, pushing Tentacruel out of the way as he went. A couple tried to stop him, but he just ducked, dodged, weaved and jumped out of the way of any attacks they tried to throw at him. While he ran, he pulled a Pokeball from his belt and threw it just as he reached the building Misty was on top of. Gyarados, stop that tentacle that's about to crush Misty with Dragon Rage. He commanded as the ball burst open and the Gyarados that formerly belonged to James came roaring out of the ball. Ash knew exactly which Gyarados of his was which because before he sent his 6 Gyarados home with Professor Oak back in Port Vista, he had painted different colored markings on the chests of all of his Gyarados during the week he was training with them. The paint was a special kind of Pokéad marking paint made specifically for water-type Pokémon that trainers could use to paint whatever sort of distinguishable designs they wanted on multiple Pokémon of the same species. This helped them tell which Pokémon of theirs was which and was the perfect way to do so for water Pokémon since it was so hard to keep things like articles of clothing on them to tell them apart with since they were always in the water. The special paint Ash purchased in Port Vista was completely water resistant and actually bonded with the Pokémon's skin, kind of like a tattoo without the pain of getting one. Ash painted the symbol AN, Japanese symbols, for each nature his Gyarados had as their markers. He used the colors black, red, green, yellow, white and purple for each one he drew. Now he could them apart perfectly. Gyarados opened his mouth immediately after appearing from the Pokeball and quickly formed the sphere of energy in his mouth that was Dragon Rage. He threw his head forward and unleashed the pent-up energy at the descending tentacle that was bent on crushing Misty. The attack struck the appendage and blasted it back, causing a large explosion. Tentacruel reared back and brought its smoking tentacle up in front of it. Unfortunately, the blast shook the roof as well and Misty started losing her balance. "Someone help me!" she screamed as she started to fall. "Ah!" she screamed again as she fell over the side. "Gyarados, get under Misty and break her fall!" Ash yelled out. The atrocious Pokémon shot forward like a rocket and jumped in the air. He caught Misty on his back just as he passed underneath her and gently landed back down on the ground with a frightened and gasping Misty on his back. "Misty!" the others yelled as they ran up to them. Misty shakily slid off of Gyarados' back, holding tightly to Horsey as she did so. "Are you okay, Misty?" Giselle asked, reaching her first. The girl just nodded her head slowly. "Yeah, I'm just a little shaken up is all," she answered while trying to calm herself. "That was a close one, Misty. Thank Arceus you're okay," Brock said. Ash looked over at Gyarados. "Thanks for saving Misty, buddy. That was some fast moving you did," he praised. The Pokémon just raised his head proudly. The moment was broken by Jessie. I hate to break up your little reunion, but the Tentacruel looks really mad," she said fearfully as she pointed up at it. They all turned around, looked up at the giant Pokémon behind them. Tentacruel was looking incredibly furious at being attacked by Gyarados and was glaring down at them with rage burning in its eyes. The other Tentacool and Tentacruel had started getting agitated again and the police were already in battle position along with their Pokémon. Suddenly the colossal Tentacruel swung one of its huge tentacles up in the air. Ash went wide-eyed. "Everyone get behind me now. Gyarados, get in front of us and use Aqua Tail to combat the tentacle it's about to attack us with," he commanded. Quick as a flash, Gyarados was in front of them with its tail spinning in a swirling vortex of water. Ash's friends, Jessie and James, quickly got behind Gyarados just as the giant Pokémon brought its tail down. Gyarados's tail and Tentacruel's appendage met in a clash and began struggling for dominance. Ash knew that Gyarados wouldn't win the power struggle though. Tentacruel was just too powerful and had a huge size advantage. He quickly formulated a plan. Gyarados shoot a Dragon Rage directly into Tentacruel's face and Pikachu help out with Thunderbolt. Pikachu hopped off of his shoulder and then he and Gyarados quickly charged and unleashed their attacks with loud cries, bellows of "Choop Gyaroo." The attacks went straight up and impacted Tentacruel in the face, making the Pokémon wince in pain and retract its tentacle as it stumbled backward. The blast affected it so much that it loosened its grip on Meowth and the Pokémon fell out of its grip and began falling far down to the ground below. No one else saw it since they were still shielding themselves with their eyes closed behind Gyarados, but Ash did. Without even thinking about it, he took off running towards where Meowth was going to hit the ground. At a fall from that height he would be either seriously injured or killed. It didn't matter if he was a member of Team Rocket, Ash wasn't about to let him get hurt or possibly even die if he could help it. "Meowth!" he yelled as he continued to run. The free-falling Pokémon finally opened his eyes groggily, free from the influence of Tentacruel now, and looked around. What? Where the heck am I and what am I? He finally noticed that he was falling like a rock towards the ground and went bug-eyed. Ah! Why am I falling out of the sky? He yelled. He continued to plummet towards the earth as he panicked loudly. Ash put on an extra burst of speed. Hold on. Meowth. He jumped forward high into the air and caught Meowth just before he could hit the ground. Ash impacted the ground and rolled a couple times before finally coming to a stop. He lay there on his stomach with Meowth in his arms. Ash groaned. I think I bruised something. He grunted out, climbing up into a kneeling position and setting Meowth down on his feet. The Pokémon finally opened his eyes, not understanding why he wasn't dead yet, and looked around. Upon seeing that he was on solid ground and after checking his body for injuries and finding none, he looked confused. What happened? Why am I not? He then looked up and saw Ash kneeling there in front of him, holding his side and looking at him intently. You okay, Meowth? He asked, concern in his voice. Meowth looked shocked. Why, you saved me, twerp. But why? He asked, baffled. Ash just smiled painfully and winced a little. You may be a part of Team Rocket, did a lot of bad things, tried to steal my Pikachu and hurt me and my friends, but you're still a Pokémon and I could never willingly let anything bad happen to you even if I tried. No matter what you've done, you don't deserve to die or get hurt. Meowth looked beyond shocked. Thanks, twir. Ash. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever done for me before. You saved my life when you coulda just let me die. Ash just grinned. Just don't try to steal my Pikachu for a day and we're even. He joked and then winced in pain again. Meowth didn't even register the joke as he continued to stare at Ash in disbelief. Never had anyone before ever did anything even remotely nice or kind for Meowth his entire life except for Jessie and James. Sometimes. He had a pretty damn crappy and unfair time of it his whole early life, and even when he got into Team Rocket it was still pretty crappy until he got put on Jessie and James's team. Things got a little better after that, but still. No one had ever actually risked their own life to save his before. And it was someone that Meowth and the other two members of his team had constantly tried to steal from and hurt, even if not intentionally hurt, to boot. He was broken by his reverie by the shouts of Jessie and James calling for him and Ash's friends, who were yelling for him. Jessie and James reached Meowth first. Meowth, are you okay? James asked his furry partner. Yes, Meowth, you had us worried. Jessie admitted. Meowth finally shook his head clear and nodded. Yeah guys, I'm fine. Just a little windswept is all from dat fall. He said. Did the twerp save you? Jessie asked. He nodded again. Yeah, he did. But I don't know why. He answered. That is strange. James said. They all looked over at the kneeling boy curiously just as his friends reached him. Ash, are you alright? Giselle asked worriedly. Ash nodded slightly and stood up slowly. Yeah, I'm fine. I think I just bruised a rib or two is all. He responded. While Ash regained his balance fully, Misty looked back at where the giant Tentacruel was still thrashing around after being hit in the face with Pikachu and Gyarados' attacks. Tentacruel is going to he really mad now, even more so than before. She said. And it looks like the fighting is about to break out again between the Tentacruel and the police. Every looked around and saw that the tension in the air was rising again. Fast. Suddenly Ash spoke. I have an idea on how I can stop all of this, guys. He said, looking up the monster Tentacruel. How? Misty asked desperately. Ash pointed it up at the lead Tentacruel. If I can take it down, the other Tentacruel will stop fighting. But how, Ash? That thing is gargantuan. Giselle said frantically. They're right, Ash. Brock began. None of us has a single Pokémon with us that can bring that Pokémon down. Even if you had all 6 of your Gyarados with you, it still wouldn't matter. That Pokémon is a pure powerhouse. He finished. Ash smirked. That's why I'm gonna fight fire with fire. Powerhouse against powerhouse. He said, pulling out a Pokeball and showing them. But who? Misty began, before everyone's eyes widened in realization. You're gonna use her, Ash? Giselle asked incredulously. He just nodded with a serious look on his face. She's the only one that can match Tentacruel pound for pound in power and strength. She's also the only one that can beat it. He said grimly. When did you even send for her? Or Gyarados for that matter? Brock asked. Earlier when Misty was talking to Tentacruel up on that rooftop. I used the Pokédex to send away for them and sent back Pidgeotto. He answered. So how are you going to have her battle it? Giselle asked. If you do it right here then the entire city will probably be destroyed. She fretted. Ash shook his head. No, I'm not. I'm going to get on Gyarados and have him and Pikachu attack Tentacruel as we pass under it. Once we have its attention locked on us we'll lead it out past the reefs and into the open ocean. It'll be up to Gyarados to get us at least out of seeing distance of the city before I have her battle Tentacruel. I still don't want anyone seeing her yet, so being out of view of everyone else is going to be important. Once we're out far enough I'll release her and explain what's going on. From there I'll stay on Gyarados and have him get as far away from the action. This is going to be, for all intents and purposes, a battle between two titans and I don't want anyone near when those two battle. Not even me. If I stayed on top of her head like usual while she's battling then she wouldn't be able to focus entirely on the battle and she will need to focus on nothing but Tentacruel in that fight. I don't want to be a distraction and that's why Gyarados and I will move back a safe distance, so she can fight without worrying about anything but winning. He finished. Brock and Misty just shared worried glances with each other and Giselle bit her bottom lip. If you're really going to do this then please be safe, Ash. She asked him pleadingly. He smiled and pulled her into a soft kiss, which she eagerly returned. After embracing each other for a few moments he released her and then looked at his other two friends. I need you guys to stay here and battle the Tentacool and Tentacruel with the police, okay? Once the battle is over and she defeats the lead Tentacruel the rest of them should stop as well and retreat. You can count on us, Ash. Brock assured. Don't worry about us, we'll be totally fine. Misty said confidently. With that said, Ash called Gyarados over to him and explained the plan to him and Pikachu. They both agreed immediately after Ash finished explaining what was going on and looked excited at the prospect of the upcoming battle. He climbed up on Gyarados' back and waved to his friends once more before giving Gyarados the okay to head for Tentacruel and begin the plan. Gyarados then took off quickly and pushed through the crowd of Tentacool as he headed towards his target. Upon preparing to pass under the giant Pokémon, Gyarados and Pikachu unleashed strong Dragon Rage and Thunderbolt attacks at the large Pokémon's underside. Tentacruel twisted and reeled back in pain upon feeling itself getting attacked under its stomach and looked down at the retreating forms of Ash, Pikachu and Gyarados. Ash stopped Gyarados and turned around to look at Tentacruel. Hey! Looking for us? Come and get us if you think you can catch us. He jeered. Tentacruel saw red enter its vision and began smashing its way through the city as it started chasing after them. Ash smirked. Here we go. Gyarados, get us to the ocean as fast you can. He told his Pokémon. Gyarados nodded and then lowered his head as he shot through the city going on as fast as he could, Tentacruel following behind while firing Psybeams at them from the gem on its head. As soon as the lead Tentacruel gave chase to Ash, Pikachu and Gyarados, all hell broke loose again as the Tentacool and Tentacruel started attacking yet again. The police officers, led by Officer Jenny, engaged them in combat, with Giselle, Misty and Brock right by their sides with their own Pokémon out. While the chaos was ensuing, Jessie, James and Meowth were cowering behind a large piece of concrete rubble. Should we interfere and help get rid of the Tentacool and Tentacruel, Jessie? James asked, looking out over the carnage. Jessie just shook her head. No way, James, we're bad guys and don't help anyone. Besides, she gulped nervously. I don't think we would really be all that much help to you, James the First mean. I think we would just get in the way, she said as she tried to hide behind her excuses that she really just didn't want to get hurt. James nodded his agreement. Right, good point, Jessie. We'll just stay here then. The two of them then huddled down behind the wall of rubble to wait out the battle. Meowth was still pretty much silent and in contemplation over what happened earlier with Ash. He just didn't know what to make of it and continued to contemplate while the battle around them raged on. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Gyarados sped through the city as fast as he could while Tentacruel gave chase, hot on his trail and extremely angry. Ash finally saw the harbor up ahead. Come on Gyarados, faster. We're almost there, he urged. Grew. Gyarados bellowed as he went faster and finally broke through the thick of the city and out into the wide open of the harbor. He neared the docks and then jumped high over them and into the water. Upon hitting the water, Gyarados was back in his natural habitat and started moving much faster. Swimming as fast as he could while Ash continued to motivate him on from his back. Come on Gyarados. Get us out to the open ocean. As Gyarados began covering the distance between the open ocean and the harbor in record time, Ash looked back and saw Tentacruel also in the water and following closely behind them. Ash silently prayed to Arceus that it wouldn't catch them. Finally, Gyarados passed the barrier of the harbor and was now out in the open ocean. Great work buddy, we're out. Ash cheered. Now pick up the speed and get us out of seeing range of the city, alright. I know you can do it, just remember your training and push. Dig down as deep as you can. He encouraged. Gyarados growled loudly and pushed faster. Ash looked back and saw that Tentacruel was now a little ways behind them with Gyarados' sudden burst of speed. They went faster than Ash could even guess and got farther and farther away from the city. After a couple minutes of traveling at Gyarados' insane speed, they finally were far enough away that the city was now only a speck in the distance. Alright Gyarados, stop. Ash commanded. His Pokémon halted and Ash quickly pulled out a Pokéball from his belt. He threw it high into the air as he shouted, Dragonite, I need you. The massive and majestic, oversized dragon Pokémon burst from within the confines of the Pokéball in a brilliant flash of light and then grew to her enormous size as she materialized into her full, gigantic form. She threw her arms out as the light finally faded and thrust her head back. Dragu. She bellowed loudly as her wings snapped open, causing a huge gust of wind to kick up which created huge waves in the water below. Gyarados rocked around in the water a little bit before it finally settled. Dragonite looked around at her surroundings and then heard someone call out to her. Dragonite. Hey Dragonite, down here. Ash yelled. She looked down at the water below and saw her trainer on the back of Gyarados waving up to her and calling for her. Upon seeing the face of her favorite person, Dragonite let an extremely happy look cross her face as she leaned her face down and nuzzled gently against her trainer's face as she cooed happily. Ash laughed and hugged Dragonite's large face in greeting. When he was done, he called up to her again. Dragonite, I really need your help. Can I count on you to assist me, please? She nodded her head quickly and cooed again. Ash smiled and then explained. You see Dragonite, there is this really massive Tentacruel who's right at your size and has been attacking and destroying a whole city with a massive army of Tentacruel and Tentacruel that's it leading. It's mad because a woman named Nastina was destroying its homes in some nearby coral reefs and now it blames every human in the city for what happened. It won't stop until everything is destroyed and that's why I lead it out here away from the city. You're the only Pokémon I have that can actually beat this Pokémon and save the city. Will you please help? He asked. Dragonite was surprised at hearing there was another Pokémon her size. All the years she lived in the ocean she never saw any Pokémon that even remotely came close to her size. She was excited at hearing this but was also very disappointed and angry at this Pokémon for attacking a whole city and putting everyone there, especially her own trainer, in danger. She also felt excited at the prospect of fighting an opponent her size and power level. This would be an extremely good test of all of her training, which definitely made her eager to fight this opponent. She eagerly nodded her head at her trainer's request and bellowed loudly in response. Dragu. Ash grinned. I knew I could count on you, Dragonite. Gyarados, Pikachu and I are going to get quite a ways back while you two fight because we don't want you worrying about hurting us accidentally, okay? He told her. She nodded her head in understanding. Alright Dragonite, I know you can do this. You've trained long and hard, and now is the time to put all of that to the test. I believe in you and have full faith that you will come out on top no matter what. Just fight with the thought of saving thousands of innocent lives and putting an end to the pain that this Tentacruel is feeling. You beat it and I'll try to help it. Dragonite nodded again as Ash patted Gyarados on the side. Get us away from here, pal. Gyarados started swimming away from the upcoming battle zone as Ash called out one last time to his own giant Pokémon. You can do this, girl. You're my Pokémon, which means that you can do anything. I love and have all the trust in the world in you. He yelled out. Dragonite went a little teary-eyed at hearing trainer's loving and affectionate words for her and called out loudly and determinedly in response to him. After she finished watching them get to a safe distance, she turned her attention back to her front and waited for the giant Tentacruel to arrive. A few moments later she saw the head of the Pokémon make its through the water towards her at a moderate speed. When it finally arrived and saw its giant opponent, just as big as it was, waiting for it, Tentacruel stopped moving and then slowly raised itself up out of the water and stood to its full and very impressive height. Ash compared the two titans' sizes from where he was at and was right about what he thought earlier. They were right at the exact same size, maybe give or take just a few feet, with Dragonite looking perhaps slightly bigger. Tentacruel and Dragonite stood there apart from one another and just stared each other down with intent and focused expressions on their face. They both knew that they had found a worthy opponent in each other just by sizing one another up. They continued to face off, neither moving a muscle as a strong gust of wind came blowing throughout the ocean and churned up large waves below the towering Pokémon's feet. Drago. She called over to her opponent. Tentacruel. It called back. Dragonite readied herself while Tentacruel did the same. Suddenly, Tentacruel moved its head forward quickly and shot a jumbo-sized sludge bomb directly at Dragonite. She immediately took evasive action and jumped to the side, letting the attack pass by her and crash towards the sea. She looked forward at Tentacruel again and saw it lunge two of its tentacles at her. Dragonite waited until they were right on top of her and then slipped under them. She grabbed a hold of both tentacles and pulled forward on them, trying to bring Tentacruel towards her. The other giant Pokémon was resilient though and stayed firmly rooted to the seabed below, only sliding minimally. Both of them struggling for dominance. Tentacruel reared its head back and then lunged forward again, shooting a huge volume of water out of its mouth with water gun. Dragonite quickly released her hold on the tentacles and took to the air with her wings, dodging the attack just in time. Tentacruel took advantage of the situation and shot multiple of its many tentacles up at the flying Dragonite, trying to hit her and knock the dragon Pokémon out of the air. Dragonite began expertly dodging each Tentacruel that lunged at and tried to grab a hold of her. She dodged, weaved and barrel rolled every time an appendage reached for her. Sometimes a tentacle would reach her and she would either smack it away with one of her fists, wings or even tail. Tentacruel was looking frustrated and suddenly launched an attack from its mouth that shocked Ash. A near-clear beam of frigid cold ice shot out from Tentacruel's open maw and zipped towards Dragonite, who was too preoccupied by the swarms of tentacles around to see the icy beam of energy heading towards her. Ice beam. Ash said in disbelief. Dragonite, watch out for that ice beam. He shouted out to her. Dragonite managed to hear her trainer even from the distance apart they were, turned her head and saw the ice-type attack heading her way. Her eyes went wide and she tried to dodge it, but in her distraction a tentacle struck her in the side and knocked her off course. The ice beam hit its mark, right on her wing. Dragonite cried out in pain and her wing was instantly frozen over by the attack. Without the use of both wings she couldn't stay up in the air very well and couldn't maneuver at all. Tentacruel took advantage of the situation and used two of its tentacles to smack Dragonite on the back and sent her plummeting towards the water far below. Ash watched on in worry. Dragonite, fold your wings around your body to lessen the impact when you hit the water. He shouted out to her. Somehow, Dragonite was still able to hear him and folded her wings around her body just before she hit the water. A large implosion of the ocean followed her impact and water shot up into the air over 30 feet high. Big waves were formed and spread out from the impact site. Dragonite rose back up from the water with her wings still wrapped around her body and was instantly barraged by Tentacruel lunging its tentacles forward at her again. Dragonite didn't see them with her wings still wrapped in front of her and was caught unaware as the appendages wrapped themselves around her arms and legs, keeping her rooted to one spot. Dragonite opened her wings when she felt her arms and legs become restrained and started struggling as hard she could to get away. Tentacruel had a tight hold however and wasn't letting go. It shot another ice beam from its mouth at the restrained dragon type, and since Dragonite couldn't move she was powerless to avoid the attack. It struck her directly in the center of her chest and she cried out in pain as the ice slowly spread out over her entire body until it was encasing everything but her head. Ash knew she was in trouble and yelled out to her again. Dragonite. Keep trying to wiggle your body around so the ice doesn't fully get root on your skin. She heard him again and started moving her body around to keep herself mobile and keep her body temperature elevated. Tentacruel didn't stop there and shot a high-powered sludge bomb straight at Dragonite. She continued to try and break free from the ice but it was all in vain. The attack hit the entire ice block encasing Dragonite and assaulted her exposed head ruthlessly. Dragonite gritted her teeth in pain from the poison-type attack and turned her head away so she wouldn't receive the full brunt of the attack in her eyes or mouth. The onslaught continued with Tentacruel not stopping the stream of poisonous sludge assaulting Dragonite. Ash shouted as loud as he could. Dragonite. Don't give up. I know you have this, just keep focusing on your reason for fighting. Fight Dragonite. Fight and don't give up no matter what, do you understand? Now break that ice. Dragonite snapped her eyes open and felt a whole new energy flow through her at her trainer's words of encouragement and belief in her. She tensed every muscle in her body and used all of her strength to break free from the ice, even as she was being assaulted by the continuous sludge bomb. She growled loudly in effort as her muscles strained and struggled against the freezing prison holding her captive. Her eyes began glowing red and a similar colored aura enveloped her entire body as she bellowed loudly and quaked her body around. Ash recognized the attack she was using as outrage and watched in amazement as the ice slowly cracked and eventually, with one powerful thrust of her body, the icy block completely shattered. Tentacruel tried to tighten its hold on Dragonite with its tentacles to keep her held down now that the ice prison it had created was gone from its opponent's body, but Dragonite just stood up to her full height regardless of the struggle Tentacruel was putting up. Her eyes were blazing red as she growled in anger and her face was contorted into one of rage. She grabbed a hold of the tentacles holding on her arms and tightened her grip on them. Tentacruel sent out more tentacles and wrapped them around her body, trying desperately to hold her down. Dragonite was beyond letting anything hold her down though and bellowed loudly again. Dragu. Suddenly her entire body started sparking with electricity and the antenna on her head started conducting electricity like a lighting rod. The yellow of the electrical energy and the red glow of outrage mixed together and made a truly awesome and unnerving sight to see. She tightened her grip even more on the tentacles holding her arms down and pinned all of the other tentacles wrapped around her body tight to her. She had a wicked grin on her face and the instant she unleashed her next attack. Ash knew why. She unleashed all of the electricity she had stored in her body and channeled it through the tentacles holding her down. Tentacruel went wide-eyed, knowing what was about to happen and tried to retract its tentacles. However, it couldn't. Dragonite had pinned its appendages tightly to her body and wasn't letting go. Tentacruel just watched in terror as the massive electrical current went all the way through its tentacles and then made contact with its body. The giant Pokémon lit up like the sky during a lightning storm. It cried out in agonizing pain as the mass amounts of voltage coursed through its body. Since Tentacruel was part water type, the amount of damage done was even more devastating. Ash watched in amazement at what was happening. He recognized the attack Dragonite just used from watching Pikachu use it so many times before. Dragonite had just learned Thunder. Dragonite continued to fry the squid with thunder, and when she was finally done, Tentacruel was badly scorched on its entire body and was teetering back and forth. It withdrew all of its tentacles, and just as the last one began to fall away, Dragonite snatched it with her hand and squeezed it tightly. She snapped her head up and glared at Tentacruel with her glowing red eyes. She had a sadistic grin on her face and growled lowly at the other giant, injured Pokémon. The red aura of outrage blazed around her even brighter as she raised her right hand into a fist as yellow arcs of electricity began centering and shrouding her fist in a veil of high-voltage power. Thunder Punch. She pulled back hard with her left arm that was holding the tentacle, and with her massive strength, increased by her anger and outrage, Tentacruel lifted completely out of the water and came sailing towards Dragonite with wide eyes. Just before Tentacruel impacted with her, Dragonite bellowed loudly and swung her right fist cloaked in electricity straight into Tentacruel's face. The impact created a sonic boom followed by a shockwave that churned up violent waves in the ocean and completely unsettled the surrounding area. Ash had to cling to Gyarados from where they were floating in the water many yards away to avoid being thrown off of his Pokémon by the churning sea. Pikachu clung to Ash's shoulder hard and Gyarados had to concentrate hard to not tip to one side and throw Ash off. Tentacruel's head snapped hard to the side as it went flying back the way it came. However, it never hit the water. Dragonite kept a tight hold on Tentacruel's tentacle and pulled back hard again once Tentacruel had gotten out far enough. The Pokémon came sailing back in towards her as she smashed her fist into its face yet again. She repeated this process over and over again, treating the other massive Pokémon like a paddleball as she ruthlessly beat it. Finally, just as she brought Tentacruel in again, she released her hold on its tentacle just as the Pokémon was right on top of her. She swung her tail around and collided it with Tentacruel's body, sending the Pokémon flying back several yards, crashing into the ocean and causing another huge tremor. Without so much as taking a break, the enraged Dragonite opened her wings and shot towards the downed water Pokémon at incredible speeds. If the poison attacks from earlier had affected her, Ash observed, she wasn't showing it. Dragonite was above Tentacruel in seconds and then dropped down from the sky with her elbow extended. She landed on top of Tentacruel with all of her weight and drove her elbow down hard on the squid's body. Tentacruel still had a little fight left in it however and brought its tentacles up, trying to hit Dragonite and get the furious Pokémon off of it. Dragonite swatted the tentacles out of the way in a nearly possessed state and struck Tentacruel on any part of its body she could hit. Tentacruel wrapped her up in a grappling position with its tentacles, trying to stop the vicious beating it was taking as Dragonite continued to struggle and strike even harder, seemingly becoming stronger and stronger with every minute that passed in the fight and the angrier she became. Ash and Pikachu stared in shock at the two colossal Pokémon who were now rolling around in the waves, fighting so hard and fast that all could be seen was a mess of tentacles, arms, legs and the colors blue and orange as both of them fought in a blur. The waves that were stirred up were well over 15 feet high and Ash could have sworn that what he was seeing right now was two gods warring with each other. In fact, if not for meeting Arceus when he was 5 years old and seeing the ungodly and out-of-this-world power that she literally radiated when she simply moved and breathed. He would have thought that the two Pokémon struggling before him were gods if he was just a normal trainer. As it was though, after seeing Arceus, he knew that she had more power in one limb than either of the Pokémon in front of him had in their whole bodies. He had no doubts that she could easily defeat both Tentacruel and Dragonite if they fought her. Even together. He turned his full attention back to the fight waging in the ocean several yards ahead and watched as Dragonite quickly flipped onto her back with Tentacruel on top of her and its tentacles still wrapped around her body. Using her incredible strength, she reared up and headbutted the battered Pokémon in the face, making it reel back and release its hold on her. Dragonite then placed her feet under the squid's stomach and then as fast as lightning and with immense strength, pushed up and kicked Tentacruel high into the air. Ash and Pikachu, even Gyarados, watched in wonder as the well over 100-foot-tall Tentacruel was launched at least 40 feet in the air. Tentacruel was horrified at being so high up in the sky and splayed all of its tentacles out around it in fear. Dragonite spread out her mighty wings and then took to the skies with the red glow of outrage still shrouding her. She flew up to the height Tentacruel was at in a matter of seconds and then grabbed a hold of all of the water Pokémon's outstretched tentacles in a big bunch in both of her hands. She began flying around in a circle as fast as she could with Tentacruel trailing behind her in a wide arc and then stopped and reared her arms back with the other giant Pokémon dangling behind her, trapped in Dragonite's grip. She looked back at her opponent and smirked darkly at the horrified look in Tentacruel's eyes. The red glow shrouding her eyes made her look even more menacing. She reared as far back as she could and then thrusted her arms forward and released Tentacruel from her grip. The water poison-type Pokémon plummeted to the ocean far below at incredible speeds. Tentacruel impacted the water with a sound the equivalent of 1,000 Draco meteors hitting the Earth. A vortex of water shot up into the air over 70 feet high as Tentacruel disappeared below the waves. Small tidal waves rose up from where it impacted and yet again, Ash had to grip Gyarados for all he was worth to prevent falling off from the way that the sea was so violently churning after Tentacruel hit the water. Dragonite didn't stop and stayed hovering in the air as she prepared the final attack that would end the battle. If it wasn't already over. She reared her head back and opened her mouth as she began forming a dark blue sphere of energy in her wide-open maw. Her stomach began glowing a teal blue as well as a spinning sphere of energy took form in her gut and flooded her entire system with incredible power. The power of outrage mixed with the charging dragon rage mutated the color of the energy gathering in Dragonite's mouth until it was a deep red color with blue sparkles swirling around outside of it. With a deafening bellow of DRAAAGGGGGOOOO. The great dragoness thrusted her head forward and unleashed what Ash would later call Draco Outrage. The brilliant and terrifying beam of dark red energy streaked towards the ocean below where Tentacruel had previously landed. Blue sparkles reminiscent of the original dragon rage encased the red energy beam and made it look both deadly and very beautiful all at once. Right before the attack hit the water, the energy took the form of a fierce-looking dragon with its mouth open wide. As